Nice.
コリンナ、あなたのお手紙が核も短いのはなぜでしょうか。
Ooh.
先生術を行うエウポリスのよう
君はもういい。とっとと帰りたまえ。
申し訳ありません。何か気に障るようなことが。
ラテン語の発音もろくにできん者に私に本を読んで聞かせる資格はない。
すいません。これから気をつけます。
帰れと言っとるんだ。
Okay, interesting setup. Completely new set of characters, of course. Thursday's boy. Uh-oh, Munich. So there's our connection.
お屋敷じゃずいぶんこっぴどくやられたわね。経営学科のカール・ノイマン君。
Doesn't he look like a younger
君は
私は文化人類学科のロッテ・フランク。
君も
ロッテ
あ
フランク
の人に本を読んで聞かせるアルバイトをしているの？
私は身の回りの世話。あの人が本を読ませるのは男子学生に決まってるの。あなたは火曜日担当。他の曜日は他の学生が目のほとんど見えない彼に本を。
So who's Thursday's boy?
ねえ、あなたどう思う？あの謎の大富豪、ハンス・ゲオルグ・シューバルト。
They're really explaining things through this dialogue.
屋敷の電話一本でドイツ中の企業の株を好きなように操作してるって話。人呼んでバイエルンのハワード・ヒューズ。
Byron.
家族もない、親しく付き合っている人間もいない。なのに彼の財産は
So
膨らむ
Thursday's
一方。
boy could be someone really quite interesting, right?
彼またの名をバイエルンの吸血鬼。
吸血鬼？
午前2時の鐘が鳴ると執事を連れて棺桶みたいな車に乗って夜中の街に出かけていくのよ。その光景たるやまるでゴシックホラーよ。
Who's this?
研究論文のためよ。バイエルン州の中世財界人と現代財界人の精神活動。
Financial figures.
ああ、怒鳴られたりぶたれたりは慣れてるから。
Is that right?
慣れてる？
ああ、僕は里親の元を転々としていろいろあったからね。実は母に会えると思ってこのミュンヘンの大学に入学したんだ。
お母さんミュンヘンにいるんだ。
マルゴット・ランガー。
そこまで分かっているんならすぐ調べがつくわよ。会いなさいよ。お母さん喜ぶわ。
だからもういいんだ。
Dakara. Ooh, beautiful.
嘘。
Beautiful, beautiful.
聞くに耐えんよ。私は美しいものしか愛さない。聞くに耐えんよ。
Ooh, his eyes? Is he blind? He's got the...
あなたのお母さんのこと調べた
Is she
わ。
dead?
なんて言っていいか。
だからもういいって言っただろ。君あのハンス・シューバルトの夜の行動突き止めるって言ってたね。
え？
僕も一緒に行っていいかな。
Careful,
もち
careful.
ろん。そうしてもらえると私も心強いし。
Both of them need to be careful here.
最後から2番目の多い年、木曜日の青年がこの地を訪れ、書物は炎に包まれ、
The
この世の
Thursday
全ては
boy.
悲しみに包まれるだろう。この地を訪れ、書物は炎に包まれ、この地の書物ってことはこの大学が燃えるってことだよ。
じゃあ木曜日の青年ってのはなんだよ。
つまりイカズチ、雷神のことだ。
The lightning god.
すごいこじつけ。
笑ってる場合じゃないぞ。
別に乗せても構わないけどさ、こんなの誰が信じるかよ。
この大学に破壊神がやってくるなん
God,
て。
destruction.
謎の徘徊を追ったのがこれが真相ってこと？
There are
幻
needs.
滅もいいとこ。
But hold on, maybe there is something more to it. Okay, it's just a guy, I suppose.
あ
It's pushing
あ、
him.
バカバカしい。
私は美しいものしか愛さない。
Beautiful things, eh?
僕は知りたいんだ。あの男がどんなに最低な男かね。
人んとこ来たら自分が先に名乗るもんだよ。
Look at this character
私はマ
design.
ルゴット・ランが 見たとこ学生みたいだけど金を渡しに来るのさ。当然さ。私があの男の前に名乗り出た時、あの男は涙を流して詫びたんだ。私に子供を産ませといてゴミみたいに捨てたんだからね。
Look at this.
カール、あなたまさかハンス・シューバルトの子供？
あなたはマルゴット・ランガーじゃない。
そうよ、1年前の新聞に出てたわ。元娼婦マルゴット・ランガー殺される。犯人は未だ不明。彼のお母さんはもう死んでいるのよ。
私が本物でないことを知ってて金を払ってるんだよ。もう金を払うべき本物のマルゴットはこの世にいないと分かってい
But still,
てね。
right.
それが彼の贖罪の仕方なのよ。金だけで生きてきたあの男にはこんな方法しかないの
They
よ。
explored this idea in the last episode as well.
私は嘘つき呼ばわりしてるけど、あんただってどうにか分かったもんじゃないってことよ。もう一人いるんだよ。あの男の息子を名乗る青年がね。
Yeah, there's this boy.
あ
Is
んた
it?
と同じようにここにやってきて同じような話をしてったよ。
嘘よ、そいつが嘘をついてるんだわ。何者なのそいつは。
同じよ。あんた方曜日ごと交代でシューバルトに本を読んで聞かせてるんだろ。そう、確か
There's this
木
boy.
曜日の青年だよ。
It's gotta be Johan, right? It's gotta be.
だからこそ僕は実の親に会ってみようと思ったんだ。
Naturally, of
本
course.
当の父がどんなに最低な男か知ることで今の里親を心から愛せると思ったんだ。
It's human nature, of course.
それだけだったんだ。君、その木曜日の青年って見たことあるのか？
私、木曜日はお休みだから。でも一度忘れ物を取りに行った時に。
見かけたことあるのかい？どんな男だった？
He's not someone who likes to be seen.
金
Ha!
髪の
That's our
綺
boy.
麗な顔立ちの。
Handsome lad. The god of destruction, eh?
僕も一緒にいるよ。ダメ。母さんと一緒にいるとここの施設に入れられる。ここにいればあなたは娼婦の子って言われ続ける。
大金持ちなんでしょ？僕はお父さんに捨てられたって言ってた。
捨てられたんじゃない。
じゃあ僕、父さんのとこに行くよ。
今はダメ。大きくなったらあなたが大人になっても会いたかったら。
He is
た
now,
だし
but
何にも欲しがっちゃダメ。冷たくされても恨んじゃダメ。母さんは恨んでないから。これ持っていきなさい。父さんが生まれてくるあなたにくれたものよ。
木曜日の青年の正体が分かったわ。
did you know?
名前はエドムント・ファーレン。文学部の学生よ。間
Uh,
違いなくシューバルトのところで本を読むアルバイトをして
I'm
る。
sure he's damn
木
good
曜
at
日
it.
担当のね。
エドモント？あいつなら今日は来てないぜ。
だって。
そう。
そのエドムント・ファーレンという学生が僕の母の息子と言っているのが
You've
許
got
せ
to
な
be
いんだ。
careful, man. He's this. I feel like he doesn't really quite know how much trouble he could get himself into here.
君の
Oh, I'm
絹
loving
の
this
花の
shot.
裾があなたは金のことしか言えないんですか？
It's consumed by it.
君の言う通りだ。君、ご両親は？
僕は里親に引き取られて、
そうか。
僕は
どうやら今度現れた青年は本物のようなんだ。
Oh,
彼は金目当てじゃない。
彼。
いや、こっちの話だ。君のラテン語、
oh, okay.
うまくなったよ。
ありがとうございます。
They have a really similar nose, don't they?
こうなったら彼の下宿に押しかけてみる？
君、ファーレンの住所まで調べてあるのか？
ここだわ。
Hmm. I don't know. I don't know. Of course, it's open. The real. Wow.
学校中エドモント・ファーレンの話題で持ちきりよ。
But she says she's seen him
まさ
before
か
though.
自殺してたなんて。
That he was quite handsome, had
校
blonde
内新
hair.
聞にも遺書の内容が載ってるでしょ。これ以上欺くことはできない。やっぱりこれって。
ああ、息子と偽ってシューバルトに近づいたことで両親の呵責に苛まれたんだ。
死ぬほど悩むんだったら最初からあんなことしなきゃいいのに。
There's more to it. Much more to it.
ロッテ、
No.
昨日は大変だったね。
そうなの。
Oh my god, that's Johan.
朗読のアルバイトも今日はお休みだった。
Friday's boy.
ひどく落ち込んでいたよ。
こちら金曜日担当の。
はじめまして。どうも、経済学部のカール・ノイマンです。法学部のヨハン・リーベルトです。
Jeez. Law major Johan Lieber. Using his actual name. Or that name, at least. Oh, continuation here. Let's go, folks.
It's all as it should be.
Ooh, look at this.
For the love of life, lose it all.
Interesting,
But we'll
interesting.
go down fighting.
Okay, folks, let's get into it. I mean, that's brilliant. I think that's brilliant. They got my ass. They really did, and I loved it. I loved it. You know, because the entire episode, of course, in hindsight, you know, it's like, okay, yeah, you know, it's a little too, they've made it a little too clear that, okay, yeah, Thursday's boy is our Johan, right? And, you know, now in hindsight, if you look back at some of the I don't know, tactics utilized by the late goddammit Edmund, right? Yeah, it's not really Johan's style, is it? To try and pass himself off as someone's son. It's not. It's really not Johan's style, is it? But that being said, let's not be too hard on ourselves here, because I'm sure, you know, for many of you, it was a similar reaction, right? By the end of it, he comes strolling in. Johan Liebert, law major, specifically, right? That right there is, of course, going to play a part, you know, given that Nina was also a law major before, you know, her life is kind of flipped upside down and her adoptive parents are taken out of the picture, right? To put it nicely, or lightly at least. Yeah, you know, more on that later, of course. A lot to get into. But, you know, the thing is, after a certain point, they've made it so crystal clear that it simply has to be Johan, right? Especially, there's that one point, Lotte at one point goes, yeah, I've seen him. I kind of ran into him at one point. He's beautiful and he's blonde. I mean, yes, it's full of misdirection, red herrings all over the place. But that right there, you know, that's almost kind of like a fake confirmation, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it turns out, you know, by coincidence, this other person that is a part of this picture, Edmund Farhan, it just also happens to be blonde and pretty, or handsome, right? Now, of course, you know, before I go any further, of course, Johan has his hands all over this. As far as this whole, you know, Hans Schubert situation goes, of course he's interested. But right now I'm just speaking of the whole Thursday's boy, and then him, you know, just ending up being Friday's boy, right? Comes strolling in, so casual, right? And yeah, it's exciting. It's always exciting to see him in the flesh, right? And the thing is, you know, by the end of this episode, yeah, you know, it feels like I am about to get a bit of a story arc here, perhaps, right? Bit of a focus on Johan. How about that, right? That's exciting because, you know, up until this point, yes, he's existed as a character, quite a prominent figure of the story, right? This looming presence that is always present, always. His presence is always felt, rather. But now I kind of actually get to see him in the flesh, hopefully at least, for, I don't know, a prolonged amount of time, or a period of time, as far as the episodes of this show go, right? As far as the story arc goes. But now, instead of just getting to experience Johan as this specter of the story, right, this Kaiser Sose-esque figure of the story, I now potentially get to see him just function, right? He's at a university. He's using his damn name, Johan Liebert. I get to see him around these two characters who are introduced in this episode, right? I mean, you know, from that perspective, it's an episode full of new characters, right? So much so that before the intro actually kicked in, you know, I actually even had this thought of this potentially actually being maybe another standalone episode, right? But of course, it became really clear, really quick, that yeah, it's going to tie into the grand scheme of things, especially as Munich, right, as the location of the university goes up. Munich, it's been, you know, hinting at Munich for some time now. You know, Tenma is headed to Munich as well. So yeah, you know, it's all happening in Munich, or it's about to happen in Munich. And then, of course, yeah, it kind of became clear from that point on, it is going to tie into the story as a whole, right? It is going to tie into Johan at some point, right? And again, you know, they kind of set this up in the last episode. They actually alluded to a lot of the things that are kind of taking place in this episode in the last episode. I believe the man in the last episode said something along the lines of, yeah, he must be a student by this point, or at this point, right, at a university. He might have actually even specified he might be, you know, a university student by this point. And of course, once again, as specified, he is a law major. And I do expect that to come into play, especially, you know, especially if him and Anna or Nina kind of start, you know, coming across each other at some point. I mean, of course, I do expect that phase of the story as well. You know, those two really getting to, you know, talk, you know, her getting to learn more about Johan at some point, right? Like a deep dive, essentially. So I do expect that to happen at some point. And I do expect this aspect of it to come into play as well, right? That they're so alike. But yeah, going back to my initial point, there's exciting setup here that I finally get to see him kind of function on a day-to-day basis, right? Or not even that, just kind of get to see him function around these people that are around his own age. Carl, Lotte, who he's on friendly terms with already, right? So, you know, there's even a possibility here that a lot of the information that she was able to gain access to might have been provided by Johan, right? Or he might have put her in the right direction, because throughout the episode, she showed a knack for gaining access to a lot of this information, right? At points, it's a little bit, not creepy, but it's a little bit, I don't know, it makes you think. It certainly made me think. You know, at no point did I think that she's trying to set Carl up. I mean, they certainly try to, you know, paint her in that manner in the cold open before the intro kicks in, right? As Carl's leaving the mansion and she's up, you know, up top. The presentation there, again, you know, it's a misdirect. It kind of misrepresents her initially to kind of keep us on our toes, to keep us against the ropes. And then, of course, the fact that Johan has made the choice to approach them, right, or approach Carl at this point, since he already knows Lotte. And of course, he knows, you know, now that he knows Lotte, she can introduce them. And that might have been one of the reasons he decided to get friendly or be on friendly terms with Lotte. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Lotte or Lotte. But yeah, you know, the thing is, even though at one point it's kind of being presented as, okay, it turns out that Johan has nothing to do with this at all, right? It's all Edmund, right? And he, you know, he was having this tremendous amount of guilt, or he was experiencing tremendous amount of guilt for trying to pretend or pass himself off as Schubert's son, right? Who Schubert actually even, you know, believes might be the one this time. I think he told Carl at one point that, you know, this might be the real deal at this point. You know, the thing is, he's kind of used to it, isn't he? I mean, it's not the first time someone's tried to pass themselves off as his son, clearly, right? But the thing is, you know, there is this element to this character of Carl Schubert of, I don't know, longing for a potential, you know, longing for a reunion with his actual son, his actual child, who is present, Carl. And Carl also happens to have a memento that was given to him by his father, Schubert, Hans Schubert, right? They show us in the flashback. So if push comes to shove, if it gets to that point, right? And I have a feeling that Johan is going to make it get to that point, or he hopes for it to get to that point, and he hopes to, you know, maybe find this, right? Sure, us the audience knows before Johan that there is something that can distinguish Carl specifically as his true son, right? His true potential heir. I'm pretty certain that Johan is also going to find out that information. Because of course, I completely expect him to become friends with Carl, or at least be on friendly terms with Carl. But also, let's not forget about Edmund and dismiss that as just, Edmund's own doing, right? There's a strong possibility here that, of course, Johan pushed him into it. I mean, it's completely possible that, that kid is hanging in his room, in room 204, ultimately because of Johan, or a role that Johan might have played in all of this, the whole setup of it. But yeah, once Carl and Lotte go to that apartment building to room 204, then it's like, okay, you're not going to find a sick Johan in there, right? Then you start thinking about these other possibilities, right? And, I mean, it's kind of morbid, but, looking at the silhouette of the hanging Edmund, you see that maybe there is a bit of resemblance there, perhaps. But yeah, the thought of it is really quite exciting to see Johan in this capacity now actually exist as a character, right? And, kind of get to observe his mannerisms and how he functions around these people. And of course, Carl specifically is an interesting dynamic with Johan specifically because they have a lot in common. I mean, so much so that I'm actually quite interested in seeing how Johan might actually react to Carl. So I'm really quite interested in seeing how Johan treats Carl, right? Especially after kind of getting to know him as well. And I do firmly believe he is going to get to know him. Because again, I believe this is his opening or his connection to Schubert. Now, of course, he's already kind of in there, right? He kind of has an in because he is Friday's boy, of course. But he's not, or he was never going to take the whole, I'm your son angle. That's just not his thing. And of course, I'll come back to that, Johan's motivations as far as Hans Schubert goes. But yeah, as far as him and Carl, let's see. At the end of the day, Johan is a master manipulator, right? He's a master manipulator of the human heart as well. So it'll be interesting to see, right? I think there is some fantastic setup here for an interesting dynamic between the two. Again, given how much they do have in common, actually. But let's go back to Johan's potential motivations with Hans Schubert, right? It's not wealth. That is not his target. Johan does not need that. It is something far greater than that. It's influence. He's after this man's influence, right? Because they certainly established that this man has quite a bit of influence. Schubert's influence over the German economy, right? And then because of that influence over the German economy, potentially European economy as well. Johan does not need money. He's got his own money. The young man is a millionaire at this point, surely, right? Because he's put in the legwork, as alluded to once again in the last episode as well, right? He was the one who ran the whole operation, right? A lot of money laundering and all of that. And the thing is, Schubert's actual son, Carl, is also not after his wealth. He's just not. Right? He's got a few other things on his mind, one of them being someone trying to pass off as his mother, his late mother. Imagine that. Imagine knowing that. Imagine confronting someone that is actually trying to pass off as your late mother, right? It's a pride thing as well. And then, there's also this element of his mother actually not resenting Schubert. She tells him, don't hate him because I don't hate him. And, at one point it was beginning to feel like that maybe Schubert suspects that maybe this could be my actual son. That something is quite familiar about Carl specifically to him. I mean, his tone changes. He's really quite harsh initially. Though, of course, Lotte did mention that he's like that with all of the male students and, only the male students read to him. And I felt that maybe these reading sessions is another method for him to kind of gauge the, capacity of these young men, right? The potential of these young men, if they fit the bill. If indeed he is looking for a potential heir, beyond his actual biological son, who he might maybe feel that he's not actually going to get to see ever again. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting if Carl actually gets to that point, or if these two actually get to that point, right? And they do kind of get to reunite in a sense. But again, there is this figure, there is that looming presence of Johan, right? It'll be interesting to see how Johan approaches this. The approach he takes with Carl in terms of potentially grooming Carl into a really specific direction. But yeah, I do believe that ultimately it's all about gaining favor with Hans Schubert as far as Johan is concerned. Again, given his influence over the economy, right? So yeah, interesting setup for sure throughout this episode. And let's kind of go back to Johan just casually walking up. He really truly stands out as someone almost alien-esque, doesn't he? Right? In comparison to Carl or Lotte, right? He's got this really pale complexion, right? He's really pristine. He's like a pristine doll, rather. And of course, surely there must be a reason that he is open to using that name at the university. And the thing is, I get yet another moniker that I can apply to Johan, or I guess the story itself is applying to the character of Johan, the god of destruction, right? Now, yes, even that aspect of it, the prophecy aspect of it, that those three students in their club are kind of going over, right? And the thing is, that scene feels so detached to the rest of the story. But the fact that they actually focus on it, right? There's actually quite a bit of focus on that aspect of it, even if it does feel a little bit detached. You almost immediately kind of attach everything that they're discussing to Johan. A lot of it is applicable to Johan, right? I mean, yes, Johan doesn't end up being Thursday's boy, but the setup of thunder, the lightning god, right? The god of destruction, all of that, it just fits the bill for Johan. And then, of course, this prophecy itself, I think it is going to play a part in some capacity. It is going to kind of manifest in the story, or perhaps even just in the story arc, in some capacity. The books shall be engulfed in flames, right? Their interpretation of that is that the school is going to burn. So yeah, let's see how all of that plays out. I mean, it is just so specific, isn't it? So, I mean, it's a little bit ominous as far as the potential end of the story arc. But the thing is, it doesn't really have to be contained to just the story arc. You can kind of apply it to perhaps Johan's story arc as a whole. But yeah, once again, kind of going back to Carl's flashback as he departs. His mom told him that, he wasn't really abandoned. And like I mentioned earlier, she was actually rather protective of Hans Schubert. And she requested that Carl not actually ask anything of him. So there's certainly something quite interesting going on there as far as the backstory goes, right? But yeah, I think as a whole, it was a great episode. It really led us down this, goose chase. Us and the characters, the newly introduced characters. And yeah, I thought it was really quite gripping. And then, of course, to top it all off nicely by giving us a return, the reintroduction of Johann Liebert, Law Major. I mean, that was beautiful. Like I said, that was beautifully executed. It's brilliant. It really is. For him to just casually stroll in after all of that, right? And just end up being Friday's boy. Yeah, it's a great episode. I really enjoyed that. And if you enjoyed that, consider dropping a like, consider dropping some comments, give me your thoughts. If you are interested in early access, or perhaps even timer-based full length or full opacity, consider checking out the Patreon page and potentially supporting the channel. The links are in the description and the pinned comment. Also links to social media, things like Twitter and Instagram, if that's your thing. Right then, thank you so much for joining me, folks, and thank you for your time, because time is precious. It really is. And I hope to see you for the next one. Until then, take it easy.